All right, guys, welcome to the Books to Business podcast. Today we have the incredible Daniel Pink, best-selling author and author of the book Drive. And so today we're going to get to chat with him a little bit about that. And, you know, Dan, great to have you, man.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I was thinking we could start with, you have a very unique background, you know, coming through law, you're in politics, obviously see things through a very economic lens, you're a speechwriter. How did, you know, for all the entrepreneurs out there, how did that translate to the motivations? Where did that space, that pivot come from?
Yeah, I think my story is similar to the stories of many entrepreneurs in that it depends on how kind you want to put it. The less kind way to put it is that it's completely half-assed. The kinder way to put it is that it kind of sort of makes sense, but only in retrospect. Mm-hmm. So let me give you. So if you can indulge me,
Sure.
I think I can sort of give you the narrative in 60 seconds, 90 seconds.
Cool.
So because I think it's an instructive story when you see the punchline, which is this. So I grew up in Central Ohio, middle class family, middle of America. I went to college on financial aid. I did well in college. I liked college a lot. I was a good student, always been a good student. I didn't have anything better to do with my life, so I went to law school. That ended up being a mistake. I always thought it was something that I would do. I never really thought about it hard, about whether or not to do it. Mm-hmm. Ended up doing it. Pretty big mistake. It's not the path that I wanted to take, not the career I wanted to have. I was always interested in politics, though, so which is a reason I went to law school. And so I got out of law school. I was one of 3 people in my law school class who graduated unemployed. I didn't practice law. And I instead started working in political campaigns. I did that for a little while, and very quickly on that, because I was like an okay writer and a very fast typist. One time somewhere, somebody asked me to write a speech, and it was okay. Then they asked me to write another one, and it was okay. Then they asked me to write another one, and it was okay. And before I knew it, through no planning at all, I became a speechwriter. So I did that for a while, and ended up doing, getting some interesting jobs in that, working for a cabinet official, working then for the U.S. vice president. And this thing that I was interested in all this time, politics, once I got into the belly of the beast, I said, you know what? This is not how I want to live my life. Mm-hmm. Now, I might have hit my 90-second threshold, but give me 15 seconds more. Give me 15 seconds more. So here I am, in my... what would that be? Like 30, early 30s, saying, oh, crap, here I am. Like, I went to law school, don't want to be a lawyer, went into politics, don't want to be in politics. What am I going to do? Now, there's a B storyline going through here, which is this. From the time that I was in high school, but through college, through law school, through some of my jobs, I was always, quote unquote, writing on the side. So in college, I was a fairly hardcore social science major. I was a linguistics major, which is a kind of very scientific, very mathematical kind of social science. And yet I ended up writing short stories on the side and actually winning some awards for short story writing. When I was in law school, I spent a lot of time writing for newspapers just for the hell of it. Even when I was working in fairly demanding jobs in politics, I was often writing on the side, writing columns for magazines and things like that. And because of ethics rules, wasn't even allowed to get paid for a lot of them, but I was still doing it. So finally, here I am. So we're taking the B storyline and the A storyline. It's coming together in this glorious way. I'm in my early 30s, and it's midnight. My wife and I are in our tiny little apartment in Washington, D.C. I have a very demanding job, but at midnight, I'm at my computer writing an article that I'm not going to get paid for. Mm-hmm. And it finally occurs to her that, hey, like this writing thing, you might actually like this, given that you're doing it for free at midnight in the midst of a demanding job. And you have always been doing this thing ever since I've known you, like kind of on the side. Maybe actually when you grow up, you want to be a writer. And I said, maybe that's the case. So I left my job. My wife kept her job, kept her health insurance. I'm not a crazy risk-prone person. I think, which is like a lot of entrepreneurs. I think there's a mythology that entrepreneurs are these crazy daredevil risk takers. But my opinion, my view is that they're actually conscious of risk, and they take steps to mitigate that risk. Mm-hmm. So we mitigated the risk. And I said, okay, I'm going to go out on my own to see if I can be a writer. And we'll give it a couple of years. If it doesn't work, I'll go back and get a real job. That was 20 years ago. So now what's the moral of this long and winding story? I have no idea. But I think that a moral of the story. No, I actually think might be a moral of the story. Now, because at the time, it doesn't make a lot of sense. This is the point that I'm in a very tortured way I'm trying to make. It wasn't like I was making these very well considered strategic pivoting decisions and did it. Not at all. I was just trying to get through the day, do good work, do stuff I like doing, earn you know what I mean? It wasn't like this kind of this very like, look at, there's my strategy here and here's the next part of my, no way. Right. It wasn't like that at all. It was more kind of frothing around, trying to figure things out. And one of the things that I figured out was, and it's a lesson that I try to give to younger people as well, when you're trying to figure out what you should be doing in your life, one of the, everyone says, oh, what's your passion? What's your passion? What's your passion? I hate that question. I think it's a terrible question. I think it's a terrible question. I don't want people asking me that question because I feel a lot of pressure with that question because you have to give kind of a really, really good answer. It's like, oh, my passion is saving seals, or, you can't, like, I don't know what my passion is. I mean, I like to drink bourbon and watch baseball and read the newspaper. I mean, I don't know. And I think it's the wrong question. I think a question that we should ask ourselves is, what do you do? What do you do? When no one's watching, when you can do whatever you feel like, what do you do? And it turned out for me that I wrote, and that's what I did. If you asked me today, what is is writing your passion? I would say no way. No way. I mean, there's some days I like it, but most days it's terrible. It's really, really hard. It's really, really hard. It's really a hard thing to do. Like running a business is a really hard thing to do. And so but hey, for better or worse, it's what I do. And it's in some sense who I am. And I think that is the discovery that you're trying to make. And then later on the thing, okay, that's who you are. Like I probably couldn't make a living drinking bourbon. I've thought about it, but it's harder to do. And so, but it's like, what do you do? And then put a layer on it. It's like, can you make a living doing it? And I think in many cases you can't. This is why, and again, I'll stop talking in a moment. Probably. This is why, like, you have your entrepreneurs, the people who are listening to your show, who are entrepreneurs. Probably some of them are on their like third or fourth or fifth business. All right. And maybe their first two are like, they're golden. They're sitting pretty. They don't have to do another lick of work in their life. And yet they're going through the torture of starting a business. Why? It's what they do. Right. And so I think that's the lesson from my tortured travails in from age 0 to age 30 something. So, and I'm not in my early 50s.
Safe to say that writing gave you flow?
It's a great question.
Yeah, interesting.
It's a great question. Not always. Flow is flow. It's a wonderful question. Flow for your listeners is that moment when you're so engaged in something that you lose a sense of self, lose a sense of time. There are times, Terrence, definitely when I do experience flow in writing, and in some ways those moments which are not super common, are the ones that make up for the hellish parts, which are the majority. That is, you can try to survive those hellish parts for those moments of transcendence. And for me, it's like one of the things that's like when you think of a sentence and it's like, wow, that's not bad. I actually just thought of that. That's super cool. It's like, wow, where did that come from? I mean, that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it kind of makes up for the other 98%.
We were talking about that last night. If you can monetize your flow, you've hit the mark. But
great point.
You also probably you run the risk of not enjoying flow at some point if you become a business out of it, right?
That's actually another really, really interesting point. I mean, I think that what you want to do is it's a great question. I mean, I haven't really thought about that. I don't think it works that much. It's not to be so Zen-like about it, but I don't think I think if you consciously try to monetize your flow, I think that you may end up inhibiting it.
Right.
But I think that monetization can be a consequence of the flow. That is, it's one of the, again, I don't want to sound like some kind of Zen master, but it's like the way to get it is to not pursue it. You know what I mean? It's like, there's something along those lines.
Yeah, so we were talking about that along the same lines yesterday with mastery. You know, in the book, you talk about certain elements of intrinsic motivation, right? And the first one being autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And you mentioned part of mastery is, you know, there's times of flow, and to your point, same with your writing, there's times where it sucks, and you have to really push through. How did you tie in purpose to mastery? Like, how do those two play together?
It's another great question. I mean, it's something that I didn't do a very good job of in the book, which is looking at, and that I wish I had, and so I'm glad you raised that question, is looking at kind of like the intersections of the three things. So I really wish and I thought about it some since. So if you take something like this, let's take, okay, let's say you have autonomy and mastery, but you don't have purpose, right? That is something like, that's in some ways like a video game. So if I have, so there's a game that I play on my phone. Okay. It's a stupid game. I have two stupid games. One of them, I'm serious. One of them I deleted. One of them I still have. So there's this game. It's called Spelling Bee. Okay. It's just like a word. It's a word game. And I play it whenever I want, and I get better at it. And I probably have a glimpse of flow during the moments that I'm playing it. There's also like a video golf game that I like to play that I ended up just honestly deleting from my phone. Okay, let's take the video golf game because that's better. So I play this video golf game. I can play whenever I want. I have complete sovereignty over what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. Each time I get better at it. Well, what's the point? You know, it's not achieving it. You know, so they all work. They all kind of work together. And so so let's say that and I think that's a way to look at it. So if you're achieving mastery on something, that's fine. But without purpose, it's not quite the same thing. It doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you that sense of. It doesn't give you that these things are reinforcing. So if I wanted to, let's take something like writing. Like I could write and try to be as good of a writer as I could. But let's say I never showed it to anybody, or let's say that I didn't really care about reaching audiences or anything like that. Then it would be this very self-contained thing. It'd be similar to a video game. It'd be like, well, what's the point? What's the purpose of that? And the thing is, it's like it reinforces itself. So if I write something and say, well, I want this to actually matter in people's lives. I want people to read this. I want people to take time, think about this, and maybe do something different in their life. That actually increases my desire for mastery, because if I have that kind of purpose in mind, it better be freaking good.
Right.
You know? And so it's a really, really great point that I left. It really didn't even occur to me until a couple of years after writing the book. Because you have to think of these things all work together. And so if you have something like, let's say you have something like mastery, and let's say you have something like purpose and autonomy. I mean, that's in some ways what this quarantine is, in a way. In that what you're doing is like I can quarantine however I want, right? I can do whatever I want during the quarantine. I can wear whatever kind of mask I want to wear, and I'm doing it to help my fellow human being. But I'm not getting better at anything in this. That's why it's like a little bit of a drain, you know. So you really do need all three, and we can't think of them as like sort of blocks that pop on one another. To me, they're more like
interchangeable
ingredients.
Ingredients. Ingredients is a great metaphor for that. They're like that's perfect. They're like ingredients in a soup.
Hey, I had a question, Jamal. I wasn't going to ask it because of time, but we're talking about autonomy. Like some companies that didn't want to go drive 0.3, 3.0. They don't want to do it. They're staying with this carrot and a stick. Now their employees, a lot of them, are at home, can't go into work. Like this book should be flying off the shelves right now. I'm serious. As we talked about this yesterday, I coach a couple. I coach a rather large group of financial services people in a big company, and the company is everyone's at home. and they're practicing autonomy. They're trying to connect these dots. Put the ingredients in to make that employee more productive, more happy. And interestingly enough, this could be a really, really interesting transformation for some corporations that figure it out. But this book is this could be coming right off the shelves.
It's perfect timing.
I hope from your lips to the market's ears. But I think that's interesting. One of the things, one of the ways to think about this or to understand it, especially something like autonomy, it's sometimes helpful to understand things by thinking about their opposite. And so with autonomy, the opposite of autonomy is control. And a lot of management techniques are very, very controlling. They're about monitoring people in many ways. And human beings, I've said this before, human beings only have two reactions to control. They comply or they defy. And you don't want people to be compliant. I mean, you want people to be compliant in some sense. You want to follow certain kinds of rules. And in certain kinds of industries, compliance act, like certain kinds of financial services, there are literally compliance departments and so forth. But if you're a boss, you don't want people to be 100% compliant, and you don't want them to be defiant either. You want them to be engaged, and the way that people engage is by getting there under their own steam. And so I think that one of the things that this remote work has done is that it's loosened the control that bosses have. And amazingly, when you loosen that control, the world doesn't go to hell. People still do their work. Why do they still do their work? Because they care, because they want to contribute to their teammates, because they like getting better at stuff.
That's cool.
And so, so what it might be is that bosses will say, "Oh, wait a second, maybe I can loosen control." And in that sense, for remote work, focus more on things like mastery. So how do you achieve mastery? You got to have information on how you're doing. So bosses could do better at giving feedback on how people are doing. And to your earlier points about purpose, bosses can say, all right, let's explain why we're doing this thing that we're doing.
Right.
Yeah, one of the really cool things about reading this is it's a lot of, it's stuff having come from the corporate world to go down this sort of entrepreneurial path that I experienced, but it's like I never thought about it. It's so interesting to have it quantified and put in front of you. It's like, I had no autonomy. I couldn't even use different colors on PowerPoint, right? And it's like you understand how from a creative standpoint, it's just...
that's crazy.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing.
Well, the engagement and disengagement stats and data that you referenced in your book, I don't think it's changed much. People.
No.
Yeah, it could be worse.
It's a remarkable story. The story of engagement, or really story of disengagement, really over 20 years in the U.S. workforce. It's been stagnant. You have, according to Gallup, only 1 out of 3 people in the U.S. workforce are engaged in their job. Just think about that for a second. Now, who knows? Maybe COVID-19 ends up shaking things up a little bit. I don't know. Maybe
because a fourth of the country's out of work now, so that number very likely will go up.
Right.
People lost their jobs. Yeah. I'm sure that companies use opportunities like this to make changes, but it's getting someone motivated and connected with that intersection, I think, is a very honorable concept to share with companies right now.
Yeah, the Google case study is mind blowing. You have things like Gmail and Google News all coming from.
Yeah. Although one of the things that's interesting about that is that they actually over the years have pulled back on that a little bit. So Google had 20% time. And they actually pulled back on that. And there are a lot of companies out there that have said 20% of your time to do whatever you want might be too much. And so a lot of them are down to maybe 10 or 5%. That seems to be the sweet spot. And what's good about that is that, again, for your coaching of these executives, it's like, that's totally doable. Totally doable. And I actually think that little island of autonomy, whatever the exact percentage is going to become the norm pretty soon.
It's hard to get people. They have their mobile devices with them now, so they're drifting anyway. If you give them autonomy and you go to a results-only environment, you can manage the results, and you don't have to manage the time.
I give you. I'm with you. I'm with you on that. That just, and that's we'll see whether that I think that's slower to change. I mean, the law firms that I talk to are so resistant to getting rid of the billable hour, which I actually write about in Drive. The billable hour is soul crushing for people. That's just not an observation. There's some research on that question. It makes people, as you're saying, it makes people totally conscious of time, rather than, sort of centrally focus on time rather than focus on the work, focus on the work itself. So all they care about is piling up numbers. It's a totally retrograde way of doing things, but there's a lot of risk aversion out there in big companies. So even some of their clients aren't pushing back hard on this. I mean, if I'm a client, like when I engage, I mean, I have a lawyer charging me by the hour. I think it's crazy. But that's because his firm does that. But on other folks whom I work with, I don't have anybody charging me by the hour. Like, if you have if I have somebody helping me out on so I'm designing a survey right now. Okay. So for some survey research. So if I have people helping me design a survey, I just want great questions, reliable questions. Like if you come up with a killer question that's going to give me new insights, it doesn't matter to me whether you spent 4 hours thinking about it or 4 minutes thinking about it. I mean, I'm not paying you for the input. I'm paying you to come up with these great questions. And if you can, so if it takes you 4 minutes, to come up with an amazing question, that's fine. I don't feel like, oh wow,
right.
You deserve less money than the dude who took 4 hours. Maybe you actually deserve more because you're more efficient.
Yeah. So speaking of incentives, this is one of the parts in the book that kind of had me self-reflecting a little bit. When you're talking about the open source, how like Wikipedia, for example, how it's dominated, and people aren't getting paid to do that. And I started thinking about how the world has changed to the extent now where, the internet kind of leveled the playing field.
Yeah.
And so the reason I was thinking about it from my perspective is because I've done so much work for free to establish credibility. And ultimately, like, I know down the road there will be payoff. And it was a great, like, it had me thinking, like, it's a combination of flow and building for later. It's like a different kind of carrot and stick.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I just thought that was a unique thing. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that, I think that there are returns. And I think that there's evidence on this. There are returns to generosity. That being a generous person, not only is it a good and noble thing to do, that within limits, it's over the long haul, it's an effective. It's a productive thing. Except the thing is that you just don't. It's not quite. It's more. Hope than engineering. So it's not as if you say, oh, I know exactly how this act of generosity is going to be returned to me one day. You don't. You just have to, err on the side of generosity because I think it's the right thing to do. Not be, protect yourself from getting taken advantage of, but also just not know. I mean, there are plenty of people whom I've helped who are never going to lift the finger for me, and that's just part of it. There are other people whom I've helped who have then, perhaps as a consequence or whatever, helped me much more than I ever helped them. So I think it's karma.
Hey, we have a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you a question. I bet you've gotten this before. I think this is in the tools part of your book at the end. It says your sentence. Like Lincoln's sentence that describes his life. I love that. He preserved the Union and freed the slaves.
I know, that's a good sentence. I can't match that.
What's your sentence?
I've thought about this too. I have gotten that before. I don't. And what my working answer is he wrote books that help people see their lives a little more clearly and live their lives a little more fully.
Oh wow!
And so that's all that that's what I'm. And when I think about that, you think about what really matters to you, and also it goes back to our initial question. It's like, what do you do? What are you good at? And the older you get, the more, at least the more I realize how many things I'm not good at. I mean, it's just like if you think about the universe of things to be good at, most of them I'm not good at, to put it mildly. And so you really, I think, have to focus on the things that you are good at. And one of the things that I happen to be reasonably good at is, I like to think, is making complicated stuff clearer, making things that are murky a little bit more open and clear. And so that's what that's what I focus on. So if I can help people, hey, there's a crazy world that's going on out there. Let me sit in this little office where I am right now, try to make it a little clearer. And if we have a little more clarity, you can do one different thing in your life, and maybe you and your family will be a little bit better off.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
Talked about also, one last question, quick. It might not be a long answer, might be a short one. The Encore career. Looking back at 60, you and I are looking at 60 in a few years. You're my brother's age. I'm a couple years behind him. Do you have an Encore career in your life? Looking back.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting question. So let's just explain what that is. So this is not my idea. This is an idea from Mark Friedman. And the idea is that what we used to have is a career path that went sort of like this, which is, so you had education, work, retirement. So 3 parts: education, work, retirement. And what Mark is saying, I've done a lot of really good writing on this, is what we're going to have now is education, work, encore careers, and then retirement. So there'll be another stage, and that stage will be spent doing things that aren't your traditional work, but that are maybe a little bit something you've always wanted to do, something that's a little bit more public spirited. And so, so I haven't quite figured that out. I am, for better or worse, someone who doesn't plan to retire. But if we, do the 30-year anniversary of this interview in 2050, right. I think it's unlikely I'll still be doing the same thing, but you never know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's cool. And I think that's one of the things that, the entrepreneurs watching this can really learn from, is that you kept experimenting, kept trying stuff. You know what I mean? You didn't pigeonhole yourself. It's a really inspirational thing. A lot of people are scared to do that, So it's a cool concept.
I think it's really important. Can I just say one thing? It's like a lot of times I think that we tend to we plan too much and experiment too little. And there's a ceiling on how much you can plan and have it be useful. And you just gotta try stuff. And there's so much stuff that I've tried that's been a flop. And it's like, okay, great, that didn't work. Fantastic. Check that one off. And there is, again, I mean, this is not just kind of intuition. There's some very there's a guy at Northeastern University, Laszlo Barbasi, who's done some research on this, and what he found, looking at he was looking at artists and scientists, and what he found was that the people who were most successful, that they had the most impact with their art, they had the most impact with their scientific discoveries, and the impact usually was not evenly distributed. So they would do 10 works of art that no one cared about and one that was huge, or they would write 38 papers that no one cared about and one that was huge, and he said that the best predictor of when they were going to get that big one was how many they put out, that it was a game of quantity. And it was basically, I don't know, if you have, I don't know, there's no professional sports on right now, no sports of any kind on in right now. But if you're a hockey fan, it's basically a lot of accomplishing stuff is shots on goal.
Right. Yeah.
If you keep waiting for the perfect angle, for the perfect, just so much of this stuff is shots on goal, and you just got to try stuff, take a shot, hey, missed, okay, great, and shrug that off. So shots on goal matter.
That's awesome.
Here's the shots on goal.
Yeah.
I know you're not hard to find. Four-time New York Times bestseller, Daniel Pink. How do people get a hold of you or follow you?
Just go to my website, www.danpink.com. There's all kinds of free resources there, and I've got a biweekly email newsletter, free of charge, free of ads. All kinds of useful stuff in that.
Awesome.
Well, hey, thank you for your time and your insights. And for anyone who hasn't read this, strongly recommend it. Drive by Dan Pink.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for helping spread the word about business books. I think sometimes they get a bad rap, but they're, a lot of them are really, really well researched. Really, a lot of them are really smart, well researched. And if you guys are picking up the gems and telling people about it, you're doing a great service.
Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate you.
Take care.